What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the Cinematic Soul. I'm your man E, and I'm happy that y'all are here with me tonight. So last week, we talked about the temptations, about brotherhood, ego, pressure, and what success costs. So now, it only makes sense that we move to the Jacksons and American Dream, because if the temptations showed us tension, right? Tension that's inside a group, whether you're your brothers, your friends, it doesn't matter. This miniseries shows us what happens when that pressure inside starts a family. And that's a different kind of weight. Because the family structure is supposed to be made to make you appear as one unit, as a whole unit. And as we know, as talented as they were from probably top to bottom, those Jacksons, they had a very interesting structure. And that holds a lot of weight, including Papa Joe and the early days, the beginnings, and how those beginnings were. So let's talk about that. So this miniseries originally aired on ABC in 1992 over 2 nights. It was a Sunday and then a Wednesday, 5 hours total. And at the time, that was major network television committing serious space to a black family story. Yes, it was the Jackson family, so it's not just any black family. This is arguably the most famous musical family in American history and American music and American anything. So you gotta give them the proper time that they deserve. What makes it more significant, though, is how involved the Jacksons were behind the scenes. We have Michael, for example. Michael approved the script. He approved the director, shout out to Karen Arthur. And he also approved the actors who would portray him at different ages. Janet had some input too, because obviously 1991, Janet was that girl. And she had some equal input and got it in certain areas, right? And apparently those negotiations stretched months, and the financial deal was substantial. Just think about that for a second. That level of control tells you something. This was not an outsider. This was the family, making sure they had the narrative that they wanted, the narrative that they presented in a particular way because it felt good to them. That's important to talk about. The early portion of this miniseries is rooted pretty much in Katherine Jackson, aka Catherine Screws' autobiography. She had an autobiography at the time called My Family, The Jacksons. I've read it. If you have not read it and you love them, please go and do that, because you can feel that perspective almost immediately when you watch this miniseries. And that shows also in how much time they spent in the beginning. They tell that love story and they make sure they don't brush over that. The story begins in Gary, Indiana. They got this small house, right? Little factory town atmosphere, limited space, limited resources, and the production design captures that pretty well to me. They captured that environment even though it wasn't filmed in Gary. You would have thought it was. You can almost sense the steel town heaviness, right? It felt crowded. It felt tight in certain spaces. And that visual tightness is one thing I appreciate as a person who enjoys cinema as a whole, because that shows the emotion and that mirrors that emotion as one with the actors and actresses in this performance. Then they get to Joe Jackson, right? And he was shown from the jump as somebody who was disciplined, intense. He made sure he got his way. whether you like it or not. Joe is going to be Joe. And he absolutely was that from the jump in this. Like when Joe came on to meet Katherine, he was smooth. He came up to her and her friend, and he knew they knew, or at least somewhat knew who he was, right? And that kind of confidence goes a long way, especially back in the 1930s and 40s. Like that kind of guy he was a big deal, you know? So then they fast forward to Joe and Katherine being together as a couple, and then Katherine getting pregnant. Joe got Katherine pregnant a lot. That was something that happened time and time again throughout a 16-year span. He put those babies in her, and you know they like what they like. I personally can't imagine having 10 children. We know that they had 10 because Brandon passed away, unfortunately, Marlon's twin, rest in peace to him. But to have 10 children and 8 of those children being born in what was it? 10-year span? 10, 11 years? That's more power to them, but more power to Katherine, because her body must have went through hell pushing out these babies. And then Joe had the nerve to go, never mind. That's for later on. We can talk about that later. But back to Joe. Sternness was on display from the jump. And then you get to later on, you know, the scenes involving the boys unfortunately being beaten are uncomfortable to watch. And I think this actor doesn't get the flowers that he deserves. He gets some credit from people, you know, like myself, who are, you know, film heads and love what we do and talking about what we do and what they do. But Lawrence Hilton Jacobs, the way he played Joe Jackson with so much conviction, I gotta give him 2 thumbs up, man, because he didn't try to soften Joe. Called me crazy. I like Joe in some of the scenes. Like, I like the energy in some parts, not all of it, not all the abusive and go and get a switch. I don't like all of that, you know. But there were some things Joe did in a scene we'll talk about later, for example, that kind of showed you his character, and the way Lawrence portrayed that on the screen, I think it deserves a round of applause, because he didn't try to soften him. He also doesn't exaggerate him, at least not to me. Like Joe Jackson, to the day he died, believed what he was doing was necessary. Like, he believed in preparing his son for a world that will not show them mercy. And as a father myself, I agree with part of that. You know, this world will not be kind, unfortunately. And while I don't want to do some of the things that he did, I also want to make sure they're ready. Now, back then, that was his way. That was a lot of parents' ways, you know, of getting their kids ready. And I can't say I fault them for that. But as time goes on, we learn and we grow and we evolve, or at least we should evolve. Take some of the things, take that olive branch, but also make your own thing. Make it flow the way you need it to flow. And that's what I do. That's what I took from Joe as a person and as a character. And that mindset reflects a generational survival logic when you think about those days. It doesn't excuse the harm. It doesn't excuse the you know, but it helps explain the mentality in a way. And then you get Angela Bassett as Katherine. Like, she was the emotional counterbalance. You know, her performance is restrained. And it's funny because while she was restrained, she didn't dominate the scenes. You could still tell that she played her part the way Miss Katherine wanted her to. Like, you can tell they were hands-on with what to do here, what to do there. That walk, you know, how she said she had polio when she was a kid. This is Katherine. I literally thought Angela Bassett had a limp for years, but I was confused because later on she came out with what that got to do with it. I was like, what happened to her leg? She's not limping in this one. And I was a kid, so I couldn't grasp that she was playing a person who had a limp. Her having a limp, and that's why she walked that way. But she just brought that character to life on screen. Like, Katherine was her own woman. She let Joe do a lot of stuff at first, but like at one point she had enough. And as we often do in life, when we have enough, we say no more. Like, that's it. When she finally tells Joe the beatings have to stop, it feels earned to me. Like, it felt like the years of swallowing the conflict before reaching the line, she can't allow to be crossed again. She saw the beating. She saw the go and get a switch. She saw the chasing Michael around here and there. She was there for it all. And she was quiet at first because she was letting him father. She was letting him be the man, right? But at some point, these are my babies, man. You gotta relax. And I respect her for that. Now, shifting to Michael as a child, aka my favorite part of this whole thing. Jason Weaver's performance anchors the first half of the series, and beautifully, might I add. So Michael Jackson personally handpicked Jason Weaver to portray him as a young boy. And the way they found him was kind of cool. So they actually did a global search involving over 20,000 children, which is crazy. And then they found Jason Weaver in that selection process. And he was selected, he said, because of his well-rounded acting skills and dancing and singing. Like, he didn't look exactly like Michael. He wasn't his twin, which if you've watched it, you know, right? He was a little dark to play Michael, but the fact that you don't even think about that while watching it, because he just embodies Michael so easily and effortlessly, you can see why Michael selected him. They said it came down to 3 guys to play Michael from that stage in his life, from 8 to 13. Jason Weaver said that he was nervous because while he knew he was talented, he had heard Michael would be watching, but they didn't know when he would be coming to watch. And to find out that Michael himself made the final decision is kind of cool. Can you imagine Michael Jackson loving you so much to say, I want him to play me as a little boy when I went and got signed by Motown Records? You know what I mean? Like, that has to feel like, y'all can't tell me shit. For the rest of my life, you can't tell me a damn thing. And then Jason, from there, only kept doing more. You know what I mean? He said he met Michael Jackson on the set, but it was funny because he said Michael always wore a disguise, right? Like, he wore like a beard and a wig just to kind of move around freely, because this is 91, 92. Michael Jackson is the king right now. So he can't just be out here all willy-nilly just hanging out with the crew. I'm Michael Jackson, so he did meet him, but not as himself. It was a disguised version, but that's still kind of cool to me. And that role kind of served as an important thing in Jason's life, because from that, he got connected with the right people, Elton John, and his career grew because I'm thinking about Lion King and smiling, but with that, he met Elton John. Elton John loved him and said, you know what? I got this thing that's perfect for you. And they used him as the young singing voice for Simba in The Lion King. And Michael was looking for somebody for this who could capture his essence, his swagger, if you will. And he said Jason Weaver did just that. Like, he was chosen for his ability to embody Michael as the young king of pop. And what helps that also is that he actually sings in some of the scenes. Now, it's not all his voice, but most of it was. Like, you can hear when they cut it in, cut it out. And also, if you know Jason Weaver, like I said, he did the singing voice for young Simba. So he can sing. He sang on Smart Guy all the time. He had his own songs. One of my favorite songs, Love's Ambition. That song just, don't know why I'm so into you. Could it be the first impression I made of you? We're not here for that. Never mind. Back to Michael Jackson. Jason Weaver can sing. He can sing down. So it made sense that he got chosen for this. Like, he is and will always be that guy. There's a scene that I really love where he performs I Want to Be Where You Are. And that was a scene that came after Michael was apparently afraid of flying and like afraid of heights at the time and didn't want to fly on an airplane. So that scene came after a scary plane ride that was like thunder and lightning. Of course, you got to go because by this time they're signed, like they're the Jackson 5 at this time. So you got to fly. And he flew. He didn't want to. He was scared. Now it's time to go on stage. And there was an interaction between Joe and Michael that I think is pretty heartfelt, and it was cool because he's like, wipe those tears off your face, boy. Don't be crying, you know, because you are Michael Jackson. And you go out there and you show him. And then the beat comes up slowly. Jason goes on stage and they have the song coming on, I Want to Be Where You Are. And that scene just makes me smile from ear to ear every single time I watch it. Like, it just, some things don't get old. And that's one of them. You know, you can see how disciplined Jason was in that scene. You can see his ambition, his shine. You can see his innocence. That combination, though, becomes heavier for me because, man, just knowing everything that happened in Michael's life, you know, from after his childhood to his adulthood to his unfortunate passing, his passing. And this miniseries captures that rise. Like, you see it all. You see him going from the little kid in the kitchen with Mr. Rat, you know, Ben, to becoming a global icon. They get all of that up to a certain point. They show the rehearsal in the living room. They show the talent show. They show the Apollo moment, the Shake It Up, Baby, Twist and Shout. They show all that good stuff. Before the global fame just shifted everything. The move from Gary to California is visually distinct in my opinion. I noticed that part because I noticed the color waves and the changes in those scenes. The color palette opens up. Like, even when they go from their house to Diana Ross's house, you can feel an expansive, a bright jump in all the colors in all the rooms. There's literal breathing in those sequences, at least to me. Maybe I overthink too much, I don't know, but at least to me, I noticed those things, and that was pretty cool. One thing I noticed as well is how when it came to casting, especially for certain characters, they didn't play around. And I want to talk about that for a second. Now that we've already touched on the heavy hitters like Lawrence Hilton Jacobs and Angela Bassett, to truly understand why the Jacksons and American Dream remains the gold standard for music, biopics, miniseries, we gotta look at this massive ensemble that just filled out the rest of the cast in this dynasty. Because let's be honest, you can't tell the story of the King of Pop without the people who helped build the kingdom. I mean, you just can't. That just wouldn't be right. You know what I mean? You got to talk about that. So let's talk about that. The evolution of Michael We got to talk about the Michael Trinity. We talked about Jason Weaver a little bit and his vocals, him being that dude. But let's look at the bookends, right? We got Alex Burrow, who played little baby, little light skinned Michael, and he gave us that wide eyed, bubblegum innocence and Gary. The early days, the early Michael. He gave us that, the little kid who wanted to just sing in a talent show, talk to Mr. Rat. Damn, shout out to Mr. Rat. But he played that Michael very well, for a little 8, 9-year-old. To take it home, though, you just have to discuss Wiley Draper as the adult Michael. I mean, if Jason Weaver was the voice, then Wiley Draper was the movement in this piece. He was one of the few trained dancers who was in this period piece, and unfortunately he tragically passed away shortly after this film even aired. His performance as Michael is haunting, especially in the Motown 25 scene. He just nailed it. That dance, it felt like watching Michael almost. It was just an amazing piece of work. And he actually danced with Michael Jackson. When you watch him recreate Thriller or the Victory Tour choreography, you can tell it's not really imitation. It's him showing his appreciation for Michael, and he channels that in the Jackson's An American Dream. He understood the staccato, the precision, and the sheer physicality that made Michael Joseph Jackson, a global icon. That Jackson bloodline, we got to talk about them too, and especially this guy. The brothers were the backbone. Michael often says how Jackie was always his backbone, and it's kind of funny watching it now, but they had the adult/older Jackie be portrayed by Terrence Howard, and Terrence Howard's a little bit on the light side, on the light skinned side, so seeing him play Jackie is really funny to me. But he was dancing. Listen, Terrence Howard can move now. We see him as Lucius Lyon now, and we see him as the hustle and flow, man, DJ, man, skinny black, man. We all see that Terrence Howard, man. But he played Jackie really well. So I gotta turn off my 2026 vision when I watch it and think about him in 92, because in 92 he was just this dude trying to get a gig, trying to get a break, and this was, in a sense, his big break. And speaking of big breaks, or breaks at least, in pure cinematic soul fashion, they cast Jermaine Jr. to play his own father. Now talk about genetic accuracy. Like, that kind of added a layer of realism to the sibling rivalry, because he knows his father, right? He knows his uncle, so he can put that little extra sauce in there when he played Jermaine. Rose petals. I'm sorry, I had to. Can y'all tell I love this piece? Like, can you tell I've watched this over 1,000 times? Because I have. But we also had the bridge years for Jackie. Like, we had Bumper Robinson played teenage Jackie. Angel Vargas played Tito. Monica Calhoun played Rebe. And they just helped ground the story. Like, these are all young actors at the time who were coming up in the world, and they just helped to make that plane land in this piece. And I appreciate all these actors in this. Finally, we got to talk about the grown-ups, the people who helped turn the Jacksons into a brand in the Jacksons' An American Dream. You got the legend, Billy D, Mr. Cool, Billy D. Williams playing Berry Gordy, Vanessa Williams as Suzanne DePass, who has done a lot for Black cinema and Black television, if we're being honest. So shout out to Suzanne DePass. They portrayed the Motown machine not just as business, but as a finishing school almost, as a polished business. for greatness, and it had to be great. And of course, we got to mention Holly Robinson P. Right? She stepped into the impossible shoes of playing Diana Ross. And she didn't just play her like a diva, she could play her as a mentor type role, which is what they kind of made Diana do early on for the Jacksons. She was the mentor, and you could see that bond between her and Michael. The reach out and touch somebody. Listen, he snatched that microphone and was like, I thank you. You're not getting this back. Shout out to Michael, man. He was that dude. He was just pure talent, pure talent. And just pure talent from this cast all around. This group of people, from superstars to character actors to people who don't even act anymore currently. You know, these people made this work. They made this miniseries work. They made it feel less like a TV movie and, in my opinion, more like a time capsule. Before we move on, I want to throw a challenge out to y'all. We talked about the Billy Dees, the Vanessa Williams, the Jason Weavers, the Lawrence Hilton Jacobs, the Angela Bassett, the Queen Mother. I want to hear from y'all. Who would you cast in your version of the Jacksons' American Dream today? If you were casting this today, who is the one actor you think could fill Michael Jackson's loafers? Would you cast Jafar like in the movie, which I can't wait to see, by the way? Or would you cast somebody else? I'm talking like the rare combination of voice, it factor, and sheer physicality that we saw from, people like Jason Weaver and Wiley Draper. Who would you go for? Or do you go for an unknown like Alex Burrow? Like, who would you pick? Who would you pick for Jackie? Would you pick a light-skinned dude again like Terrence Howard? No shade to my light-skinned brothers out there, but would you pick a light-skinned Jackie? I don't know. Kind of curious. So head on over to the Instagram page or the threads at Cinematic Soul Pod. Again, that's at Cinematic, CINEMATIC SOULPOD. And drop your dream casting in the comments. I want to see your picks. I want to see who you would cast as the brothers, as Katherine, as Joseph, of course, as Michael. And whoever has the best dream cast, we're going to shout out on the next episode before the deep dive. But for now, let's get back into the music that defined the era, because they had some bops. Damn, they had some good songs. You can't talk about the Jacksons without talking about the work. In this miniseries, the music is more than a soundtrack. This music is a character in itself, damn near. Like, the music is percussive, it's raw, it's driven by those early rehearsals in that little small living room, that James Brown sound, that unrefined sound that the boys had, just soulful and hungry. If you listen to Going to Kansas City or I Got the Feeling, if you listen to Big Boy now in 2026, you can hear, that emotion, that passion. It wasn't the sharpest, it wasn't the clearest, but that's okay. You could still tell those boys had something to give. And that was in 1966 when they did that? So you think about the time it was and how great they sound still to this day. That's impressive to me. Suddenly, when they go from that to Motown, they get the bubblegum soul era, and it kind of becomes architectural, right? Like, you can hear the corporation in the background, the group of songwriters and producers that Berry Gordy had on deck to just put these songs together like it was nothing. Crafting hit after hit after hit, just hit makers. That's what Motown was back then. And the miniseries shows you that when they play I Want You Back to ABC, showing how they explode with these sounds that bubblegum soul sound, if you will. It's bright, brassy. It has that mathematical aspect to it. Like I'm saying, like you can kind of tell they crafted this in a factory almost, but yet and still it was magical. That sound was brilliant. Then you go to the third act. And the third act is kind of about liberation. The third act kind of shows when they went from Motown to Epic Records, Jive Records. They showed them transitioning to these different groups and these different grooves and feels that they went through in real life. And what's cool to me is how when they do that, they make sure you hear the voices, especially when they sing Never Can Say Goodbye. That's actually Wiley singing, and I thought that was pretty cool to me. Like, they had these voices that weren't quite like Michael, but you can get the feel, you can hear the woos, the signature Michael things that they did were on display in that moment. Then they go to Michael Jackson's Thriller era when he says, I want solo spot. He'll do Motown 25, he'll do the thing with the brothers, but he wants to perform his song, like he says, especially like the new songs. And he performs Billie Jean on that stage. In that moment, that music transformed from a family harmony to a solo revolution, to a king being made right before our eyes. They show all that from track to track, from top to bottom, from Katherine and Joe singing to the Jacksons back on stage again singing We Thank You in the end. That's what it's all about, that family structure, that group, that feel, that magic. Now we got to talk about the negotiations, because apparently the negotiations at that time were intense. So Michael's representation was protective about his portrayal, and rightfully so, because around that time, like we said, this was the early 90s, folks tried to play in Michael's face a lot, and they couldn't have that be done in this. Like, you can't do that right here, right now. Folks were playing in Michael's face, and they just were not going to have that. Then you get Janet's team. They insisted on having comparable influence. LaToya wasn't involved. Jermaine's tension with Michael around that time was piping hot, and that added another layer to the whole thing. Like, even small production details, like Michael, for example. Michael wanted what Michael wanted. So when they were filming at Havenhurst, right, reportedly, he insisted on having real lions being present for authenticity, and rightfully so. At first they said no, but you don't tell Michael Jackson no in 1991. Like, that's just not gonna happen. So he made sure they had lions. He delivered lions to set himself just to make sure things were accurate. Imagine that. Imagine having lions on standby to put in a piece of work for accuracy's sake. And that's kind of fire, bro. Shout out to Michael, man. And that just almost feels symbolic in a way to show just how powerful and how big, maybe to his demise, that Michael was at that time. Like, his world operated on an entirely different scale. Now, in terms of accuracy, they do kind of compress timelines a few times. We just got to be honest, right? There were some conflicts that were simplified. There were certain controversies that were softened or taken out altogether. That's important to acknowledge, especially here on the Cinematic Soul. At the same time, though, it reflects how they saw themselves. 1992. United in origin, disciplined in upbringing, ambitious by necessity. Even after Michael's death in 2009, this miniseries just kept coming on. It came on even more so around that time, repeatedly. Like, they would show it over and over and over again, and I probably watched it over and over and over again. Like, I can tell you that whole thing from top to bottom. Audiences returned to it. Part of that was for nostalgia's sake, but the other part of it was just a desire to revisit the beginning before the later chapters complicated the public perception, right? There was something about the grounding and the groundedness of watching the early rehearsals again, about seeing the five brothers in their matching outfits or crazy outfits, right, from the tour, but still in sync. Seeing Janet in the background before she became Janet, before her voice was ruling the airwaves, absorbing everything before stepping into her own legacy. This functions as documentation, but also as a memory. Our memories, their memories, all in one. What I think this captures, though, is the formation of a family that reshaped pop music, performance standards, global celebrity culture, five brothers emerging from Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana. If you've never gone to Gary, let me tell you, Gary isn't exactly glitz and glamour by any means of the imagination. That's where they're from at their core. This family redefined stage choreography. A sister who would later become one of the most influential pop artists in her own right, in her era, for decades. Few families have altered the entertainment landscape at that scale. And television rarely dedicates this much space to telling that origin story from within the family's perspective of the mother who isn't in show business, the father who, love him or hate him, he was who he was. They show all of that. And I appreciate that on a personal level. On a personal level, this miniseries to me feels like something you grow up with. As a child, you focus on the performances, the costumes. As an adult, you notice the pressure, the expectations, the emotional cost. These are all real things. But here's the real kicker. Both of those reactions, both of those feelings can coexist at the same time. You could admire the brilliance and still acknowledge the damage that happened, because there was a lot of damage that went on. You can appreciate Joe's drive while recognizing the harm in some of his methods. Some, not all, but definitely some. You can love Michael's artistry without pretending his life was just some simple thing that was picture perfect. Love him to death, but it was complicated. That balance is important. And we have to talk about it all in a loving way, in a comforting way, in a caring way. But that balance is needed. And the Jacksons delivered that masterfully. The Jacksons' An American Dream remains a significant piece of Black history television. It preserves an origin story. It reflects a family protecting its legacy. At all costs, some would say. And it gives us 5 hours to sit with the beginning before the world complicated the middle and ultimately the end. That to me is worth revisiting. Hell, I've watched it twice in the past weekend. You know what? I might turn it on again tonight just because. Just for the love, for the magic, for the Jacksons. Everybody loves the Jacksons, right? That's the Jacksons' An American Dream. And this is the Cinematic Soul Podcast. Stay black, stay magical, and keep the soul in cinema alive. Thank y'all for listening. Peace and love.